Okay, welcome to this series of tutorials for Montana State University's MUST 341 Synthesis and Sound Design. I am Dr. Ben Furman, and today we are going to start talking about synthesis, which can be one of the more intimidating topics for students. So I'm going to show you what we're going to use. I'm going to go over some patches in this series of videos, and hopefully it will be much easier for you afterwards. To start, we're going to use VCV Rack 2. We are using the Pro version, and that is already installed on all of the computers in the lab and in the studio. However, if you want to do this at home, you can download the free version and use that, and that will work within VCV itself, or if you want to incorporate this into other DAWs like Logic Pro, Ableton Live, or Cubase, then you will need the Pro version. And between the two, if you just click on the link on their page and then Get Rack 2, they have the two versions. They have free and they have Pro. And I'm signed in, so it's not going to show me the price, but I believe it is currently $149.99. The other thing that's really useful is, if I go back, you have the library. And the library has a collection of currently over 3,500 modules, all of which can be purchased if they're premium, or if they're free or open source, they can be downloaded and incorporated directly into your VCV session. And if you are doing this at Montana State, then guess what? I have already gone through and downloaded and incorporated all of the free and open source modules into the account that is synced on the computers in the lab and in the studio. So they're all there, but if you want to follow along with this at home, you will need to go through and click on a button that will say Add for all of the free and open source modules. And this will take a while, so I recommend just, have the browser open in one window and have Netflix or something else open in the other and do that. But let's get into VCV itself. So the icon you're looking for is VCV Rack Pro, and you just double click that, and it will open up. And this shows a couple of things here. So this is the default new patch. Up here, we have a couple of really interesting things. Unlike most Mac apps, there is no file menu up here in the title bar. It's actually in the app itself. So if you want to make any changes, like if you want to save or open, you have to go up here to the file menu. Then the other thing that's really important, over here we have the library. Do not click log out if you are on one of the school computers. We are logged in, and that way, if any modules are updated, we can update them. Please do not log out. On top of that, if you log out, then it makes it impossible for other users to use the program without finding myself, Dr. Antas, Dr. Bolte, or the College of Arts and Architecture IT so that we can log you back in. So please, never log out. Another thing you'll notice is that the library button currently has a red dot. That means that there are updates. So if you ever see that, just click on Library and then click on Update All. And that's really important because it's going to go through and it's going to download the latest version of modules. And we do want to keep those all current. Once it's done doing that, you'll get this pop-up that says all plugins have been downloaded. Close and relaunch Rack to upload new updates. Just hit OK, and it should automatically pop back up. So that is what you would do in order to set it up. This is the default new patch that you will see in every instance of VCV Rack. And it's pretty cool, but we're not going to be using that. So in fact, we're going to be going through and we're going to be deleting a lot of this and just basically starting over with totally new modules for everything. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of that. We don't need the notes. We don't need any of this. I'm just going to leave our MIDI to CV, our scope, and the audio module. So let's start with the most important stuff. How do you get data in and out of VCV? And the answer is you use MIDI to CV to get the data in the form of MIDI. And that converts it to control voltage, so we can use that to control all of the modules as if they were actual Euro Rack modules. Then we're going to route all of the audio. I've got a scope here so that we can see the waveforms if we need to, but really they're going to go to audio, and audio is my output device. So to configure the audio, since I'm on a Mac, I want to click up here, which it will say potentially no device. Currently it's showing the correct one, but I'm going to click on Core Audio, and then Studio 1810C is my audio interface, so I'm going to use that. I can set the sample rate, I can set the block size. You can usually leave that at 256, and then 44.1 or 48K, whatever version you need based on your DAW session. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. However, I'm not really a fan of the audio interface itself, if only because I tend to use more channels. So I'm going to delete that. And then to create a new module, I'm going to right-click or control-click, and that brings up the library browser. And there are thousands of modules, so I'm going to search by clicking on the brand, and we're just going to scroll all the way down to the actual VCV modules. And there I am going to use Audio 8. And this is like the audio device, but it's a little bit more involved and a little bit more powerful. In fact, I have 8 outputs and 8 inputs. And you're probably saying, why do you want to have inputs? Well, maybe I want to use my microphone and run an audio source into VCV and use that as a modulation source, or maybe an envelope follower, or maybe I just have a bunch of really cool effects that I found in VCV and I want to run my guitar through that instead. So to configure Audio 8, I'm going to go to Audio Driver and make sure that it's Core Audio, since I'm on a Mac. If you're on Windows, you will almost certainly want to go with WAS API, and then you're going to want to find your device where it says no device. So I'm using Studio 1810C, so I'm going to use that. And then it auto-populates the sample rate and the block size based on what my computer's doing. So we've got the output, but over here we have the input, so MIDI to CV. There's 3 lines here, and this is really, really cool because it lets you do some really awesome stuff. So if you don't have a MIDI controller, what you can do is you can just make sure that it's set to computer, keyboard, and mouse, and you can actually use the QWERTY keyboard on your computer as if it were a piano keyboard. So the Z to question mark row is your first row of white keys, then ASDF is your first row of black keys, then Q through the close bracket is your next row of white keys an octave higher, with your number keys functioning as the black keys. I do have a keyboard hooked up, so I'm going to select Core MIDI, and then it will give me a list of all of the devices that are attached. So I'm just going to do Q Nexus, and we're going to use that. Then down here I have MIDI channels, so if I'm only sending from a specific channel, if for example I have my keyboard set up in splits, I can tell it which channel to listen to, but mostly you can be safe using all channels for now. Okay, so that's the absolute basic setup. Let's make some sound. So to start off, I'm just going to use the basic VCV objects. So again, right-clicking to bring up the library, and then my brand is set to VCV. And in order to make a really, really basic synth, I need a couple of objects. I need an oscillator, I need an amplifier, and I need an envelope generator. So I'm going to start with VCO, which is my voltage-controlled oscillator. And I'm just going to grab the output, let's try a saw wave, and connect that to Audio 8. And yay, there's audio, but only in the left channel. I can also connect that to my scope, and that will let us see that waveform, which is pretty cool. A quick note with scope is that it will always show things in the color of the cable that is attached. So if I change the cable and get a different color, I get something totally different in terms of the color. But now we need to have an envelope generator, and we need to have an actual envelope for the ADSR, and then that needs to go to the amplifier. So we'll start off with the amplifier and work our way backwards. The amplifier, I'm just going to take my saw and put that in. Then we connect this to my scope, and you can see if I drag the level of the amplifier down, I can take it to silence, or I can take it to full volume. So, pretty cool. But we're going to use the envelope generator so that we can have control over that. And then we're going to hook all of this up so that it's controllable via our MIDI keyboard. So to do that, I'm going to grab the ADSR envelope generator. I'm going to take the envelope out and connect that to the CV input of my voltage controlled amplifier. So now it goes completely dark. But here's the cool thing. If I hit this push button, it triggers the envelope. And as long as I hold that down, it stays at the sustain phase. So let's connect this back up to the output of VCA into scope. So we have a flat yellow line, nothing's happening. We've got signal, and when I release that, we go back to silence. All right, so we can make some sound. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the output of my VCA to audio 8. And I want to connect this to the two device inputs. And you can tell that they're inputs because they're not bordered. With the basic VCV modules, if they have no border and they're just kind of that silverish, whitish color, they're inputs. If they have a black border, then they are outputs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the output from my VCA and I'm going to connect that to two device, 1 and 2. But there's already an output coming here. Well, that's not a problem because the cables in VCV Rack are effectively infinitely stackable. So I can add another cable on top and route a copy of the signal to a different location. So to do that, I'm going to hold down Command, click and drag. Then I'm going to come back over, hold down Command, click and drag. So now, if I hit this push on my envelope generator, we should hear a sawtooth wave in both speakers. All right, so far so good. But I want to have this MIDI controlled. I'm banging on my MIDI keyboard right now, and obviously I can't hear anything, and neither can you. So let's do this. To do this, we're going to use the volts per octave. And we're going to take that and connect that to the volts per octave input. So we're going from MIDI to CV to the VCO. What this is going to allow me to do is it's going to convert MIDI information into voltage. And it's going to use the 1 volt per octave schema so that every time I increase by a full volt, I go up by an octave. So it's dividing everything into a 1/12 of a volt, or less if we get into microtonality, but we're going to avoid that for now. Then I'm going to take the gate output. I'm going to connect that to my ADSR. So a gate is a really useful signal, and I'm going to show you that really quick. I'm going to take that over to input 2 of the scope, and I'm going to hit a key on my MIDI keyboard, and watch what happens with the red line. So as soon as I hit it, the red line goes high, and it stays there as long as I'm holding the key down. And you can tell that I'm holding the key down because I have a green signal in the gate output port right there at the actual MIDI to CV, and then over here at the input of the scope. And as soon as I release that, the signal goes down back to 0. So the gate is exactly what it means. It is open and it lets electricity flow through, and if you close it, it stops the flow of electricity. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to connect that here to the ADSR. And what that's going to do is it's going to send the signal. When the signal goes high, it's going to trigger the envelope generator. That will go through the attack phase, then the decay phase, and then it will sustain at that percentage of the volume, which is currently 50%, as long as I hold the key down. Then, as soon as I take my finger off, it enters the release phase. So currently, it's going to take 100 milliseconds to ramp up, 100 milliseconds to decay to the sustain level. It will sustain at 50% of the volume, and then it's going to take 100 milliseconds to return to silence after I release my finger from the key. So, cool. If I want a punchier attack, I can take my attack and my decay down. Maybe bring my sustain up a little bit. Yeah. And if I want a longer release, I can increase the release time. Now, that is a really long release. So here is where retrigger is going to come into play. Retrigger is a reset, and it basically is going to quickly end the current envelope and then start it again as soon as I hit a new note. And that can be really useful if you start noticing clicks in your synth patch. Of course, you can also take down the release time or double click to reset it. The other thing you can do is if you want to enter specific times, like maybe I want this to be exactly 25 milliseconds, but it's working with the mouse, or in my case, a trackpad is not great. I can right click on the value and type in the number directly. So if I want 25 milliseconds for attack and decay, I just right click on that and set those, and then we're good. All right, so a couple other things to show you. If I right click on most devices, I get some really, really useful things. I have the info tab, and that will take me to things like the user manual. So if I have questions about what something does on a module, I can always look that up. That's super useful. If I have totally screwed up the module and I've put in some weird settings, I can't remember how to fix it, I can always go to initialize. I can also do that by selecting the module. Let's make some changes here. And then if I select it and hit Command-I, it resets to the default state. Then I can also do things like randomize, disconnect all the cables, or bypass the module. Then there are some other things that are a little bit special. For example, the MIDI to CV device. If I right-click there, I have a couple other things that we might not have used before, like a pitch bend range, which would come out of the PW, or pitch wheel, output. And I can set that in semitones and tell it how many semitones to bend from 0 to 4 octaves. The other thing that's really cool is on that I have the ability to select polyphony levels. So polyphony will only work fully if all of the devices in your chain, from the generation from the MIDI all the way through to your audio, are totally polyphonic. In this case, I'm using the built-in VCV modules, which are, so I can set that up, and let's do 16 voices of polyphony. And watch what happens to the size of the cables. So the cables have gotten slightly thicker, and that indicates that they're polyphonic. Now, with that, be aware that if you have a lot of thick cables and then they go to a thin cable, that is where it's breaking down. That is where you're going back to monophonic. So always be on the lookout for that. If you're really going to do nothing but polyphonic patches, then what I recommend doing is going to the tags, and you can select multiple tags by holding down Command and clicking on something. So let's select that well, first let's reset our filters. Then let's go to tags. We're going to select polyphonic by holding down Command. And that's going to show me all the polyphonic devices that I have. Then maybe I only want effects. So let's go to polyphonic effect. And you know, I'm a big fan of reverb. So let's find a reverb module. And there is spring reverb. Let's use that. Okay, so now we've got a spring reverb module, and it's polyphonic, so it should work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it over here. Move these down. And then I'm going to reroute the output of left and right from the VCA. I'm going to take the left and the right output of spring reverb and connect those to the to device. And here you can see that the inputs are polyphonic, but the outputs are monophonic. And for actual audio, that's generally fine. And in fact, you can hear that I'm playing polyphonically. So let's go to a big ol' reverb. Huge amounts of decay. And you can hear we've got a lot of fun going there. But that's a little bit too much for me, so I'm gonna reinitialize it. So yeah, beware of polyphonic patches. Just make sure that everything in your signal chain before you actually submit your patches is polyphonic if that's what you're going for. Finally, to save, you want to go up to the File menu and you want to do a save, or a save as if you're making changes to an existing patch. And that's going to come up to a save dialog, and by default it saves it in this user directory. You don't want to do that. You generally want to save it either in your Ableton Live project folder, or you're going to want to save it on the desktop so that you can find it and transfer it to your OneDrive or to a flash drive. So I'm going to save it on the desktop. I'm going to call it VCV Basic Demo and hit save. Then I'm going to quit VCV, and you can see I've got this VCV Basic Demo.vcv patch. So if I go back to VCV Rack, it should automatically load the last patch that you were working on by default. If, however, oh no, I hit Command-N, I created a new default patch, yeah, at that point I can just go to Open. I can go to my desktop folder and I can find my VCV patch and open that. And at that point, we're all good. So that's the big thing. You're going to be submitting patches, and you're also going to be submitting recordings for some of these. For recording, you are going to want to use another module that is called Record. So I'm going to reset my filters in the library, and I'm just going to search for Record. REC is the abbreviation that they use. And it's this guy. I do have it favorited. To favorite something, just hold down Command and click on it, and it gets that yellow border. So here we go. To hook up Record, I'm just going to connect a copy of the left and right output of my spring reverb to the left and right input of Record. So again, I'm going to hold down Command and drag over left to left from output to input, and then the same thing for right. Now, if I play a couple of notes, we'll see the meter bridge up here on Record, and I'll be able to set my levels and see if I'm too loud or too quiet. Okay, so yeah, whamming the keyboard with all of my forearm does get a little too much, but I think we're good. The best way to record with this is to just hit the record button, and it's going to say, where do you want to save your recording? I'm going to save desktop, so Command-Shift-D is the shortcut, and we're going to call this Demo Rec for Demo Record, and we're going to give it the .wave extension. So we'll hit save, and now we're recording. And as soon as I hit the record button again and it goes back to gray, we have stopped recording. All right, so I can see an asterisk up here, which means I have not saved the patch recently, so I'm going to hit Command-S to do that. Command-Q, and we've got a WAV file. Yay! Let's open that with Audacity and take a look at our results and make sure that it is stereo, that it's playing everything, that it's trying to scan every single one of my plugins. Okay, so here is our file, and because I waited a couple of seconds, there's a little bit of dead air, so we can just delete that. But okay, it's playing through my MacBook speakers and not through the correct interface, but it does play, and I can see all of the audio in the spectrogram, and yeah, everything is there. So this would be something that I would want to crop and do an export to make sure that it's a nice, good WAV file. But then I would just go to those two, and I would put them in a new folder. Call it something like VCV Assignment 1. And to submit that, I would right-click on it and go to Compress. And that will give me the zip file, which is what you need to submit for all of your assignments. So that's just the basics of using VCV Rack. And from here, we're going to start looking at some actual synth recipes in the next couple of videos.